Hello and welcome to another episode of Transforming WHO, a series of video interviews where I talk to colleagues inside WHO and outside about the work we do and how we transform. And when you see this, it's actually a pre-recorded interview that we are doing in the corridors of the World Health Assembly, which is currently taking place here in Geneva. And so we've set up a temporary studio for the interviews here in Geneva. And today I'm very happy to be joined here in the studio by Cathrine Marie Lofthus, who's the chair of the Program, Budget and Administration Committee of the WHO. It's the so-called PBAC committee, which is the subcommittee of the executive board and one of the most important governing bodies of WHO. We'll get back to what the PBAC is doing, but thank you very much, Cathrine, for joining me here in the studio or for taking the time in your very busy schedule to talk to me.
Thank you. Really interesting to say something about my experience here from the WHO.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. But first, a little bit about yourself, Cathrine. So you're by background a medical doctor. You're trained in endocrinology, I believe, but then fairly early in your career, you went into leadership. I think along the way, you also did some management and administration degrees. So you sort of have a double hat of medical and management. And then you became leader, of course, in endocrinology, but early also CMO in Oslo University Hospital. That was a merger of various big hospitals in Oslo. And then eventually the CEO of the big regional authority taking care of healthcare in southeastern Norway, and then in 2021 you took up your current position of Secretary General in the Ministry of Health and Social Services in Norway.
Yeah, that's correct.
Anything I forgot in your impressive career, Cathrine?
That's quite impressive that you knew all of those things about me, because that's correct, yeah.
And then you were elected to the executive board of WHO. Actually, I used to serve on that executive board as well, so I kind of know that
I followed you, you know.
You did?
Yeah, from the Nordic countries.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've been elected chair of the PBAC committee, which I just mentioned, which is a committee of the EB where we're basically looking at program budget and management stuff. And that's a very important committee. And as chair of the PBAC, you have been basically leading the current process where we are in the biggest crisis, I think, in our history in WHO, the withdrawal of the United States, also withdrawing a lot of funding. So we lost our biggest donor. So you had to lead the negotiations on downsizing our program budget. And that has been adopted by the Health Assembly now and the other day. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But that was, I imagine, a fairly difficult process because we came from a draft program budget of $5.3 billion for 2 years, and now it's down to 4.2. That's a reduction of more than 20%. That's a huge reduction from also where we were. You had to negotiate between some member states who want an aspirational, hopeful program budget, and then others, maybe your own, who wants more realism in the program budget. That started already back in January when you had the PBAC meeting. Can you speak a little bit to how that process was?
Yeah, that was quite an interesting process. But first of all, I will say that the process and the consensus we achieved shows that it's possible to work together and multilateral work is possible. And I think one of the biggest challenges is the different expectations, as you mentioned. While Norway and my own perspective and my own experience by running the biggest hospitals in Norway is that you need realistic budget based on available funds. Whilst in WHO and for that sake other UN organizations as well, you have this aspirational budget based on the needs. And I think we need to find something in between there. And I think PBAC had some good discussions on finding that something in between.
And maybe we should explain to the people watching this that when we decide a program budget in WHO, which was just decided by the Health Assembly for 26 and 27 for $4.2 billion, it doesn't mean we have the money.
No, it doesn't mean we have the money.
It means we can spend the money if we get it, right?
That's
not like a budget when you run a hospital. If you run a hospital in that way, it wouldn't work. But how does it work then in WHO?
No, that's actually, as you say, it's a budget. If you get the funding, then you can use it. But of course, if you know that it's not possible to have all the fundings, you have to have some realism in the budget, even though it's aspirational. And of course, if you have more funding, then it's much more easy to take the budget up than reducing the budget. So that's why this process was absolutely necessary to adjust the budget and to find this consensus.
And still, like you were saying, and even I watched it when I watched the discussions in the PBAC and the executive board in January, and also now, some member states like your own who are advocating for realism and let's make a realistic budget, and then other member states who are sort of saying, well, they still want an aspiration. Maybe the money will come. Maybe we'll have it. So what's the balance? What are the interests here?
Well, I think when we experienced the US withdrawal and also the experience from a lot of countries that now have an abrupt stop in the American financing, I think that gave us a common understanding that no, it's crisis, and no, we have to think different, and we have to do something about the budget. So I think the process we had, that we adjusted the budget in January first, and then even more now in February. And also the process, I've been talking a lot to the Secretariat, and I must commend the Secretariat for their transparent and inclusive work. I think that was absolutely necessary, so the member states could have trust in the process, so they could give strategic input, but not micromanage. So I think all the discussions we had, both during the committee meeting in January and also now in February, was necessary to find that consensus on an adjusted budget.
Because by the end of the day, there's 194 member states of WHO, so you're saying the process, it takes time in WHO, so it matures, and like you were saying, since January and now up until May, there's been a lot of negotiations, briefing of member states, and then achieving the consensus. Yeah. And congratulations, because it was adopted by the Health Assembly. I think everybody was very, very happy about that. We got the pandemic treaty adopted, then the program budget, and that was hugely successful, I think, for us.
Totally agree.
Even though the program budget is much less than what we had just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but I think it has been a good process and shows that we can work together, the 194 member states, and that it's possible to find consensus. And I think with the reorganization and the reform work of WHO, I think we can do a lot also within the new budget.
And that's certainly also up to us who work in the Secretariat to get that in place. And there will be a difficult process after this. So now we start the next biennium, the next 2 years, with an approved program budget, 4.2 billion. Sounds like a lot of money. But we still don't have all that money, right?
Yep.
There's still a funding gap of, I think, 1.6 billion.
That's right.
That needs to come.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic? Will we fill that? Will we actually be able to achieve all of that in the next COP period?
I'm quite optimistic. I think it's possible to fill some of the gap. I don't know how much, but quite a portion of the gap I think is possible to fill. And I think the process that we've been through is really important for the donors. They see that we now are more realistic in our budgeting, and they see that we are able to prioritize and to reorganize. And then I think it's more easy to talk to the donors, even though it will be hard and it will be difficult. We must realize that a lot of member states now are prioritizing defense more than health, actually.
Yeah. So basically that's happening, for instance, in Europe, where your own country is. I mean, there's certainly many, if not most governments, they are, as you say, prioritizing very much military security over development aid. So we have a sense that it's difficult to fill the gap left after the US.
It is. And that's why we are so... we are talking about this, that the donors must give flexible funding, because we have some funding, but the funding is earmarked, and then we are not able to use the funding for the areas where we have the largest gaps in the funding, and that's also a problem for the organization.
Sure. And that's what when we talk about sustainable financing, it's basically getting away from the very earmarked funding and getting more flexible, predictable funding for WHO. And that was approved back in 2022, I believe, in the Health Assembly. And that also increasing what we call the assessed contributions, which are the membership fees that the countries are paying.
Yeah.
And there was another, congratulations on that also, there was another success, I would say, here in the Health Assembly, because the countries basically approved the increase.
Yeah, they did. Now we have approved one step of the increase in the sex contributions, but we have actually agreed upon that we are going to achieve 50% of the base budget, that the AC increase or the sex contribution increase will be up to 50%. So we have some more steps to take.
It's like a ladder. So we take these steps and then we increase the assessed contribution. But that also means that the member states, even though they committed to it in 22, they still have every year when it's proposed in the Health Assembly, they still have to agree once again on getting that assessed contributions. That might be difficult in some countries, I could imagine, also having worked in a government, because that's basically shifting the money you give to the organization away from your earmarked priorities and then to unearmarked flexible funding that you don't decide as much as a donating country. Do you think that governments, parliaments in countries will stay committed to that going forward?
I think it's possible, and I think the step we achieve now is an important step on the way. And I think this must go hand in hand with the governance reform, because the member states has to see that we have a good governance, so that their own priorities are shown in the program budget and the priorities. So what are the program work we are going to achieve? So if it's possible to have it hand in hand with the governance reform, I think it's possible.
But still, in many countries, including your own, politics change, governments come and go, parliaments change, and then priorities change.
Yeah.
So there might be political changes where suddenly say, yeah, maybe we committed to this, but we want to prioritize this. So any concerns in that going forward?
Yeah, but of course. So that's why it's important for the WHO to work on transparency, efficiency, and accountability. And as I said, so that member states feel confident that their funding will be used in an efficient way and the most useful way, and in accordance with the priorities of the member states.
Yeah.
And so that's good. That's good governance for me.
So that's a quid pro quo. I mean, the member states and other donors will commit to funding and flexible funding, but they want to see efficiency reform from the organization.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah.
And that's why I think the reorganization and the reform work that WHO is going through now is actually extremely important. And it's important that WHO becomes more one organization, because it has actually now been, as we say now, several organizations within one organization, where you have different divisions talking to the same donors. So the reform work is extremely important. So we have one organization, one prioritization process where the member states are in lead, good governance, and then I think the increase in assessed contribution is possible.
I see. Speaking of the member states, of course, going back to their priorities, I mean, there's sometimes also a feeling, again, between realism and aspirations, that when we come to the governing bodies, EB and the World Health Assembly, member states will propose resolutions for new areas of work of WHO. And then, of course, we try to see how that fits into the budget. But sometimes there's not that balance. One of your predecessors as chair of the PBAC committee, Björn Kümmel from Germany, he described this as going to a dinner and ordering a 5-course meal and then only wanting to pay for the salad and then expecting some others to pick up the tab. And what Björn was addressing was, of course, the imbalance of some member states and other donors paying a huge proportion of the budget and others sort of having the aspirations. How do you see that going forward?
Yeah, but adoption of a revised and reduced budget shows that member states are aware of the new realities, and I think that that shows that it's possible. But at the same time, many member states they feel that resolutions is a way of highlighting their priorities. So going forward, I think we need to assure that WHO's work is financed in a democratic and sustainable way, so that member states' priorities are covered and financed through the general program of work. Because when we agree on a general program of work, that's actually our priorities. And then it shouldn't be necessary to have all these resolutions. So I think we as member states as well, and even Norway, have to consider very carefully when do we actually need to have these resolutions. And in that regard, I'm really pleased with the discussion we had in PBAC this May, when we agreed upon some recommendations for the governing bodies, how we can work with the resolution as a institute, to say it that way, how the member states should put forward, how we should handle resolution, how we should look at the costing and everything. So I'm really looking forward that we can continue that discussion in the executive board, how to work with resolutions. For actually, when we agree upon a general program of work, that's our priorities, and that should cover the items that member states are want to highlight.
So you're basically wishing for a general program of work that is more realistic, more balanced also with the budget.
Yep.
Do you also want a budget that is more realistic, like a real budget for a hospital? Is that your wishful thinking for the future of WHO?
I think, as I said previously, we have to find a balance. A more realistic, but not like running a hospital, because then you have to have a budget that's funded. That's it. But a bit more realistic budget, but it could be aspirational to some extent. But I think we have to show the donors that we are realistic.
Yeah. So a balance between aspiration and realism, and then finding that right balance. So this current crisis of WHO is, of course, a crisis of funding. We talked a lot about funding here because we lost our biggest donor with the withdrawal of the funding of the US, etc. But it's broader than that.
Yeah.
It's also other UN agencies and multilateral. Some of our sister agencies are even harder hit than the WHO. And what is even more striking is many of the health programs in countries that are also losing funding. But some are also saying that it's a broader crisis of multilateralism. It's a challenge to the values and the principles of this rule-based international order, etc. Do you see that as well as a broader crisis? Are you concerned?
Yeah, I'm concerned, and I see it as a broader crisis, but also that we achieved a consensus when it comes to reduced budgets. I think that shows that multilateralism works, and it's absolutely necessary. It's the way forward. And I think WHO now is showing way for other UN agency and organizations that you have to go through reforms. But I think it's also important that WHO now can collaborate with other health organizations, the health architecture, the architecture of global health institutions, and also with other UN organizations, and be part of the UN 80 reform work.
Oh, yeah.
Because we have to avoid duplication. And it's a lot of duplication, and it's a lot of organization, and it's actually a bit challenging to have the total overview over the architecture. So we have to work together now to find a more sustainable way of of working with global health.
But you see a future for multilateralism?
Yeah, I do.
A future for WHO, but
yeah.
a more focused, trimmer, more effective WHO.
Yeah, Norway sees WHO as the cornerstone in global health. The main normative and technical agency to promote health. We need WHO. But it's, of course, extremely important that WHO are focusing on the core functions, the functions that only WHO do. And that all other health organizations, global health organizations, they are dependent on the normative and standardization work that the WHO does. So I see a role for WHO, and I think they could also be a coordinator at country level, but we need to avoid duplication. That's extremely important.
Thank you very much for that commitment to global health and to WHO, and thank you very much, Cathrine, for taking the time to visit me here in the studio, and thank you very much all of you for watching this episode of Transforming WHO, and do stay tuned on this channel for upcoming episodes.